This is a 2006 Mazda MX-5 Miata, and it might be the cheapest one on the market, or at least it was until about a week ago when I purchased it. The intention here is I was looking for a 90% street car, 10% track car. I wanted something that was simple, didn't need a lot of maintenance, but could be really fun to just drive around. I've always loved Miatas, and I've learned that the saying is true, that Miata is always the answer. But typically, that advice does not extend to this third generation. It's called a boat. It's called a cruise liner. People make so much fun of this generation of the car because its proportions make it look much bigger. It weighs a little bit more. But does that totally ruin the experience of this car? Well, in my week's worth of ownership, I would say absolutely not. This is a really fun car. It's simple in its essence, and it really does feel like Miata. I'm used to Miatas, primarily NAs. I've owned a few. I've owned them for over a decade. I've tracked them. I've tracked every generation of the Miata, and I love them all. But I will say, this generation might be the perfect fit as a daily driver. You feel like you've got a little bit more room on the inside. You don't feel cramped in the car, and I'm a small guy, but I can still appreciate that difference. Even the ND is very small in its interior, and the NAs and NBs, of course, we know they are. But the NC gives you a little more space, and I think it hasn't lost any of its charm of a small, fun sports car. In this third generation, they made a lot of changes and a lot of improvements. In fact, the entire architecture is different. No longer is it necessarily a double wishbone front and rear. There's actually a multi-link rear suspension setup, and a lot of parts are shared with the RX-8 platform. So it makes for a really interesting car and something very different. Part of my goals here is I wanted to learn a slightly different platform and get to know what the NC is all about. And so this is my opportunity to do just that. I picked up this car for $5,000. And here, when I think a lot of used cars have really skyrocketed in prices, sounds like a great deal. But it's not a perfect car, and it shows why it came in at the $5,000 price point. Currently, if you look on the popular sites like Auto Trader and other used car sites, you'll see that the prices are much higher, typically $10,000 or more for a third generation Miata. And oddly enough, the NAs are surging in value, and I see those at $8,000 plus. Now, I've owned a number of NAs, and I've never paid more than $4,000 for a complete car. In this case, I really wanted to keep the budget low, and I found this one, but I knew it wasn't perfect. There are visual blemishes on the inside and out. It has a ton of miles, 256,000 of them when I purchased it. But every Miata I've owned has exceeded 200,000 miles during my ownership or started out above 200,000 miles, and I've never had major issues other than things that I've caused myself. So I wasn't too intimidated by this car when I picked it up. Now, I have heard numerous issues about the NC in a full race format or as a DE car. But my intention for this car is not a full race car, and I don't have those same concerns. In fact, I really want to keep this car very much like stock. I know, I'm posting this online, and you guys can come back and tell me how silly I was to think I'd keep it anywhere near stock. But right now, that is my intention. And with that, I want to keep the factory wheels, which enabled me to run 205 width tires, which are quite small. And the reason I want to do that, coupled with a harder tread compound, is that I want a car that feels loose and dynamic underneath me. I really enjoy that aspect of driving. And when you put a bunch of grip on a car and you don't scale up the horsepower performance proportionally and you don't change all the suspension to match, you end up with a car that becomes more lackluster in other categories. You might find that it can hold on in any turn, but it feels really sad in the straightaways. This car, I feel like, is great out of the box, and I want to extract as much driving enjoyment out of the car as I can. And I think to do that, I keep it very close to the stock formula. For me, things that I care about for driving enjoyment are shifter feel and everything being tight and solid. And I think the best way to accomplish that is just catch up all the maintenance. I know that doesn't sound terribly exciting, but the end goal is getting something that's exactly as Mazda intended. And so far, it's been a joy. In just the week or so that I've owned it, I've changed out brakes, and I figured out some weird issues with a check engine light that was actually covered up with some electrical tape, which was a fun little thing to discover. But after making these small maintenance items and updating with a new key fob and things like that, I'm extracting a lot of the niceties that came with a brand new car back in 2006. So for the low price of $5,000, I think I struck gold. And I'm really excited to see how I evolve with this car and what it serves me over the coming years. I find it really cool that in 2006, we got this little key. This was actually the solution from Mazda to modernize the car a little bit. This thing that basically looks like a credit card is actually your full wireless key solution. And you need, of course, a blade still as a backup. When I purchased the car, I did get just a regular blade key, but it was just something cheap that somebody had to go get at a Home Depot or something like that. And so I went ahead and purchased this to add all those features. And what's really neat about it is it gives me the option to just walk up and press a little button to unlock the car. Then I can open and get in, and there's actually a solution to just turn the key to start it, just like this. It's pretty neat to have that back in 2006 on such an interesting little solution. It's nice also because I regained things like being able to pop open the trunk with the release and all the niceties from a modern vehicle, but just the additional purchase of this unlocked it for me. What was really interesting is that the key itself has a little plastic cover that you can just turn, and it looks like where a key slot would be. You pop the cover off and the key slot is there, and that's how I picked up the car. So I was really excited to find out that this was even an option or a possibility with my spec of car. I found out by going into the dealership and asking for a key, because in the past I've picked up NA replacement keys for only $13. You just give your VIN number and boom, $13 later, you've got a brand new Mazda key. Well, it wasn't $13 for this. In fact, the dealership quoted me over $400 just for the key fob section. And beyond that, I had to buy the key blanks separately, and both of them needed to be programmed. Now, of course, they charged $150 some odd plus to get the programming done, and I didn't want to pay any of that. But luckily, I was able to find the key fob itself, brand new, an actual Mazda key fob on eBay for about $200. Still wasn't cheap, but it wasn't as bad. And there's a place here in Atlanta called racecar that, in fact, the Mazda dealership referenced me to for older vehicles such as this. And they only charged me a little bit over $50 plus the little coin key or coin battery that you need for this to operate. So for under $300, I unlocked all those wireless features, the keyless features in this vehicle. So to me, it was worth it. Now, what I've heard was a complaint. The reason they moved away from this key is if you were to put this in your back pocket and sit on it, you can break this key. So keep that in mind. Thankfully, I put my key in my front pocket and I put it in the same pocket as my phone. So it's not going to be a problem for me, and I'm excited to have this feature. I think this NC generation deserves a second look. Everybody says it's big and it's heavy, but in reality, it still feels very small and nimble when you're driving around traffic. Also, put it on the scales, you'll find it's only about 2,500 pounds. I put mine on the scale and I was impressed. Realistically, go on the market today and look what's available with a similar power to weight, or at the very least, similar weight. I found high horsepower cars, even if they're light in their category, you can still feel the weight. And engineering gets great, but it doesn't overcome that, in my opinion. So having a lightweight car is a truly special experience, and it's hard to find. I think this is light enough to still fit in that category. Yes, FRS and BRZ is a great solution. A new Miata is a great solution. But at $5,000, it's hard to argue against this solution. So this is my next move, and something that I'm really excited to dig into, learn more about the platform, and see where it takes me. What have I learned? Well, I've owned a number of NA Miatas. I've owned 135i and 128i BMW most recently, Honda S2000, and a number of other interesting vehicles. But what I have to say is the saying is true. Miata is always the answer.